July 20th, 1969. A moment that forever changed human history. Neil Armstrong takes his first step on the lunar surface, uttering his famous phrase about a small step for man and a giant leap for mankind. But behind the scenes of official history, something is happening that will only be whispered about for decades. The second man to walk on the moon, Edwin "Buzz" Aldrin, performs a mysterious ritual connected to one of the Earth's oldest brotherhoods. In his hands, he holds a small silk flag and a special certificate authorized by the Grand Master. What happens in these minutes becomes one of the space program's most closely guarded secrets. A Masonic ceremony on the lunar surface. It sounds like fiction, but it has a real basis. What connects the ancient order of stonemasons and a cutting-edge space agency? Is it a coincidence that so many space pioneers wore Masonic rings? And what meaning did they imbue their actions with, taking earthly rituals beyond our planet? The history of Freemasonry is rooted in the depth of centuries, in the medieval guilds of builders and stonemasons. These people, who erected magnificent cathedrals, possessed secret knowledge of geometry and architecture, which was passed from master to apprentice. By the 17th century, guilds began to admit not only professional builders, but also educated people interested in esoteric knowledge and philosophy. Thus, speculative Freemasonry was born, a brotherhood using the symbols of the building craft to convey moral and spiritual values. In 1717, the first Grand Lodge was formed in London, marking the beginning of organized Freemasonry of the modern type. From there, the movement spread throughout the world, gaining particular influence in America. The hierarchical structure of Freemasonry includes 3 main degrees: entered apprentice, fellowcraft, and master mason. Each degree is accompanied by special initiation rituals through which the candidate comprehends the symbolic lessons of the brotherhood. The philosophy of Freemasonry is built on several key principles. Belief in a supreme being, called the Great Architect of the Universe. The pursuit of self-improvement through the symbolic hewing of the rough stone of one's personality. Brotherly love and mutual aid among members of the order. The search for truth through the study of sciences and arts. The Masons' fascination with astronomy and cosmology is particularly noteworthy. For them, the arrangement of the celestial spheres reflected a divine order that had to be comprehended for spiritual growth. The compass and square, the main symbols of the brotherhood, serve as tools not only for earthly construction, but also for measuring cosmic space. The influence of Freemasonry on the formation of American statehood cannot be overstated. Among the founding fathers of the USA, there were many members of the Brotherhood: George Washington, Benjamin Franklin, John Hancock. Masonic ideals of liberty, equality, and fraternity were reflected in the Declaration of Independence and the Constitution. Even the architecture of Washington is permeated with Masonic symbolism, from the street layout to the location of key buildings. For 2 centuries, Masons held influential positions in American politics, business, science, and military affairs. Their presence in significant social institutions, including scientific organizations, created a strong network of connections, contributing to the advancement of ideas and people sharing the values of the Brotherhood. It is not surprising that when America turned its gaze to the stars, Masonic influence also manifested itself in the space program. The birth of NASA occurred against the backdrop of acute geopolitical confrontation. On October 4, 1957, the Soviet Union launched the first artificial Earth satellite, causing a real shock in American society. This event, known as the Sputnik crisis, forced the United States to reevaluate its space policy. A year later, on July 29, 1958, President Dwight Eisenhower signed the National Aeronautics and Space Act, officially establishing the National Aeronautics and Space Administration, NASA. It is noteworthy that Eisenhower himself was associated with Masonic circles, although he was not formally a member of the order. Among the key figures who stood at the origins of the American space program, there were many brethren. Wernher von Braun, the brilliant rocket designer brought from Germany after the war, became a member of a lodge in Huntsville, Alabama. James Webb, the second administrator of NASA, who led the agency during the critical period of preparing for lunar missions, was a 32nd degree Scottish Rite Mason. The symbolism chosen for the new agency contained elements well known to those initiated into the secrets of the Brotherhood. NASA's circular emblem with a white star on a blue background, a red vector sign, and an orbital ring has parallels with Masonic iconography. The very form, a circle, symbolizes perfection and eternity, crucial concepts in Masonic philosophy. The star, in turn, resembles a pentagram, one of the oldest esoteric symbols associated with secret knowledge of the cosmos. Within the nascent space agency, its own rituals and traditions gradually formed. Many of them bore a striking resemblance to Masonic rites, a special form of greeting, symbolic actions before important tests, even a specific language understood only by the initiated. Astronauts preparing for flights formed a brotherhood within a brotherhood, an elite group united by a common mission and common secrets. The first group of astronauts, the famous Mercury 7, included at least 3 Masons: Gordon Cooper, Virgil Grissom, and John Glenn. The latter subsequently became the first American in orbit and a U.S. Senator. It is noteworthy that selection for this group was not based solely on physical and professional parameters. Candidates underwent numerous psychological tests and interviews where their moral qualities and worldview were assessed. As the Apollo program developed, the connection between NASA and Masonic lodges became increasingly evident. Many key engineers, flight directors, and of course astronauts were members of the Brotherhood. They brought Masonic values to their work: precision, attention to detail, striving for perfection, fraternal mutual assistance. Qualities critically important for the success of space missions. Edwin Eugene Aldrin Jr., known to the world as Buzz Aldrin, was born on January 30, 1930, in Glen Ridge, New Jersey. His journey to the stars began long before NASA. A graduate of the U.S. Military Academy at West Point, an Air Force pilot, a participant in the Korean War, where he flew 66 combat missions. Later, he earned a doctorate in aeronautics and astronautics from the Massachusetts Institute of Technology, developing spacecraft docking techniques that subsequently became standard for NASA. But behind this brilliant career lay another side of Aldrin's life: his deep involvement in the Masonic movement. Buzz was a member of Lodge Number 1414 Montcrest in Texas, where he achieved the degree of Master Mason. His affiliation with the ancient fraternity was not a secret among colleagues, but the general public was largely unaware of it. Preparation for the historic flight to the moon included not only zero-gravity training and landing practice. Aldrin's spiritual preparations remained behind the scenes. Shortly before the Apollo 11 mission, he approached the Grand Master of the Grand Lodge of Texas with an unusual request: to grant him special permission to conduct a Masonic ceremony on the lunar surface. This request was met with enthusiasm. For Masons, the opportunity to perform a ritual beyond Earth held immense symbolic significance. The Grand Master not only granted permission, but also prepared a special certificate appointing Aldrin as Special Deputy of the Grand Lodge of Texas, authorized to represent our Grand Lodge on the Moon and all other extraterrestrial bodies. Aldrin meticulously prepared for this mission. Among the personal items astronauts were allowed to take with them, he packed a small silk flag with Masonic symbols, the very one that would later be unfurled on the lunar surface. He also took a special Masonic jewel and the aforementioned certificate from the Grand Master. Witnesses from the astronaut's inner circle recall how seriously he took this spiritual mission. For him, it was not just a symbolic act, but a deeply significant ritual, connecting ancient tradition with the cutting edge of human achievement. Aldrin believed that Masonic values, the pursuit of the light of knowledge, brotherhood, moral improvement, should accompany humanity in its greatest endeavors. His preparation included adapting traditional Masonic rituals for performance in lunar gravity and with limited mobility in a spacesuit. Some gestures and movements that are part of a normal ceremony had to be simplified, but the sacred meaning of the act remained unchanged. On July 21, 1969, as the whole world held its breath watching man's first steps on the moon, something happened that remained off-screen from official broadcasts. After Neil Armstrong uttered his historical phrase and the initial tasks were completed, a so-called quote zero occurred in communication between the crew and Houston. At this moment, Buzz Aldrin requested a few minutes of silence for quote 1. It was officially announced that the astronaut prayed and took communion, using a small communion kit brought from Earth. However, according to testimonies from those close to Masonic circles, during these minutes Aldrin performed an ancient ritual, adapted for the conditions of the lunar surface. In his memoirs, published decades later, Aldrin only briefly mentions a quote 2 without revealing details. But Masonic sources claim that during these minutes, he took out a pre-prepared silk flag with the image of a double-headed eagle, a symbol of the 33rd degree of Freemasonry, and unfurled it, uttering ritual words. According to a former employee of the Flight Control Center, at that moment, part of the communication between the Moon and Earth was conducted via a closed channel. A technician, who accidentally connected to this line, heard Aldrin utter phrases resembling a Masonic oath. In addition to the flag, Aldrin left several items on the lunar surface that were not officially registered in the NASA catalog. Among the artifacts, according to initiates, was a special medallion depicting a compass and square, the main symbols of the Masonic Brotherhood. This medallion was buried in the lunar soil during the ritual, symbolizing the quote 4 for a future Masonic presence on Earth's satellite. It is noteworthy that after returning to Earth, Aldrin handed over the flag that had been to the Moon to the Grand Lodge of Texas, where it is kept in a special vault, accessible only to high-ranking members of the order. Photos of this artifact have never been published, which has led to much speculation about its true appearance and the symbols depicted on it. Another piece of evidence of a Masonic trace in the lunar mission was the strange time intervals between the astronauts' key actions. Some researchers note that the sequence of the first actions on the Moon follows numerical symbolism important to Masonic tradition, especially the numbers 3, 5, and 7, which have sacred meaning in the Brotherhood's rituals. Some specialists in Masonic symbolism point out that the configuration of the lunar module itself at the moment of landing, when viewed from above, formed a geometric figure resembling the Masonic squaring of the circle, an ancient symbol of the union of the material and spiritual worlds. Whether this was a coincidence or a deliberate calculation by engineers associated with the Brotherhood remains a subject of discussion. Striking statistics reveal the scale of Masonic presence in the U.S. space program. Among Apollo mission astronauts, over 30% were confirmed members of Masonic lodges, a figure dozens of times higher than the average level of Masonry among the adult male population of America at that time. This disproportionate representation raises a legitimate question. Was Masonry an unspoken criterion for selection into the elite corps of space pioneers? Of the 24 astronauts who flew to the Moon as part of the Apollo program, at least 8 were active Masons. In addition to Buzz Aldrin, Gordon Cooper, Apollo 10, Don Isley, Apollo 7, Edgar Mitchell, Apollo 14, Stuart Roosa, Apollo 14, John Young, Apollo 10 and 16, Thomas Stafford, Apollo 10, and Paul Weitz, Skylab, were Masons. Edgar Mitchell, the sixth man to walk on the lunar surface, was a member of Artesia Lodge No. 28 in New Mexico and attained the degree of Master Mason. After returning to Earth, he founded the Institute of Noetic Sciences, dedicated to the study of consciousness and spiritual phenomena, a theme resonating with the esoteric interests of Masonry. John Young, the only astronaut to fly on all types of American spacecraft, Gemini, Apollo, Space Shuttle, was a member of a lodge in Orlando, Florida. His Masonic affiliation was never publicized, but lodge archives contain documents confirming his active participation in the Brotherhood's work before and after the lunar missions. Notably, many astronaut Masons held high positions in the NASA hierarchy. For instance, Deke Slayton, one of the original 7 astronauts and later director of flight crew operations, was a 32nd degree Mason of the Scottish Rite. His influence on the formation of Apollo mission crews can hardly be overestimated. He made key decisions about who would fly to the Moon. Some space historians note that informal Masonic connections might have played a role in the selection of astronaut candidates. Although officially the criteria were exclusively professional and physical, in practice, recommendations and personal trust were crucial. In a closed environment where mission safety depended on the absolute reliability of each crew member, belonging to a brotherhood founded on mutual trust and support could have become an unspoken advantage. NASA's symbolism is a special language, understood by few initiates. If one carefully studies the emblems, mission patches, and agency logos, one can discover surprising parallels with Masonic tradition. NASA's official emblem, a blue circle with a white star, a red vector, and an orbital ring, contains elements familiar to every Mason. The circle symbolizes eternity and perfection. The white star resembles the blazing star, an ancient Masonic symbol of divine light and knowledge. And the orbital ring correlates with the concept of cyclical time, important for esoteric tradition. Even more indicative are the patches of individual Apollo missions. The Apollo 11 emblem depicts an eagle descending to the lunar surface, a symbol with deep Masonic roots. The double-headed eagle is the emblem of the 33rd degree of the Scottish Rite, and the ordinary eagle with outstretched wings appears in many Masonic rituals as a symbol of supreme spiritual achievement. The olive branch in the talons of the lunar eagle echoes the acacia, a sacred plant in Masonic tradition symbolizing the immortality of the soul. The names of spacecraft also carry a Masonic subtext. Apollo, the god of the sun and light in Greek mythology, correlates with the central Masonic metaphor of moving from darkness to light. The command modules of the Apollo missions were named Columbia, Kitty Hawk, Yankee Clipper, names associated with the Masonic history of America. The lunar module itself was called Eagle, a symbol whose meaning in Freemasonry we have already noted. NASA's color symbolism also deserves attention. The dominant colors, blue, red, and white, correspond to the primary colors of the Masonic lodges of the Scottish and York Rites. blue symbolizes universal brotherhood and the celestial vault, the quote which every Mason strives to be a part of. Red signifies a passion for knowledge and sacrifice, and white, purity of intentions and spiritual enlightenment. Of particular interest are the geometric figures in NASA's symbolism. Triangles, pentagons, and hexagonal structures, often found in the design of spacecraft and patches, have direct parallels with Masonic geometry. The five-pointed star, or pentagram, holds a special place in both traditions, symbolizing man who has achieved perfection, with outstretched arms and legs, an image embodying Leonardo da Vinci's Vitruvian Man, an important symbol for Masons. Even the choice of the name, quote, 6, quote, for the first American manned flight program is not accidental. In Masonic tradition, Mercury, Hermes, is considered the patron of secret knowledge and alchemy, the transformation of the lower into the higher, which metaphorically corresponds to overcoming earthly gravity and venturing into space. The compass and square, central tools of Masonic symbolism, are reflected in the measuring instruments and navigation systems of spacecraft. These tools, used for precise determination of position in space, echo the Masonic concept of finding one's place in the universe. The name of the Apollo program was not a random choice. Apollo, the ancient Greek god of light, sun, and knowledge, perfectly embodied humanity's striving for enlightenment through the conquest of space. In Masonic tradition, the light of knowledge, dispelling the darkness of ignorance, is a central metaphor for the spiritual path. The selection of this particular deity for a program designed to take man to the moon has a deep symbolic subtext, understandable to the initiated. The numerology of the Apollo missions also deserves attention. The first successful lunar expedition was the Apollo 11 mission. In Masonic tradition, the number 11 symbolizes the transition between the physical and spiritual worlds. Precisely how many steps lead to the Temple of Solomon, a central symbol of Masonic cosmology. The total number of planned missions, 20, also correlates with Masonic numerology, where 2 symbolizes the duality of matter and spirit, and 0, perfection and completeness. The launch times of spacecraft were often timed to astronomically significant dates. Thus, Apollo 11 launched on July 16th, during a period when the constellation Sirius, especially revered in Masonic tradition as a symbol of higher knowledge, was in a special position relative to the moon. Many launches occurred at dawn, a time symbolizing the awakening of spiritual consciousness in Freemasonry. The astronauts' pre-flight rituals included elements reminiscent of Masonic ceremonies. The traditional breakfast before the mission, when the crew gathered at one table in a strictly defined order, resembles the ritual meal of Masons. The sequence of donning spacesuits followed principles similar to putting on Masonic regalia, from outer to inner elements, with specific phrases spoken at each stage. The farewell ritual before boarding the spacecraft played a special role. The astronauts lined up in a specific order, exchanged handshakes in a particular way, and spoke phrases that had parallels with Masonic passwords. These actions, visible to the public, were perceived as a simple farewell, but for the initiated, they carried an additional meaning. The symbolism of the Apollo mission patches represents a veritable Masonic encyclopedia. The emblem of Apollo 8 depicts an infinite symbol surrounding the globe, a reference to the Masonic concept of the eternal cycle of death and rebirth. The Apollo 13 patch, despite the unlucky number, contains 3 stars forming a triangle, one of the key Masonic symbols, representing the Trinity of the universe. Most indicative is the Apollo 17 patch, the last lunar mission. It depicts Apollo driving the chariot of the sun over the lunar surface, with the American eagle in the center. The composition as a whole resembles the Masonic symbol of the phoenix, a bird rising from the ashes, which can be interpreted as the completion of one cycle of the space program and the beginning of a new one. The moon preserves not only human footprints, but also material evidence of our presence, hundreds of objects left by astronauts intentionally or accidentally. These artifacts, frozen in airless space, represent a unique open-air museum where each exhibit tells its own story. Among them, objects related to the Masonic tradition hold a special place. The most famous Masonic artifact on the moon is considered to be the silk flag delivered by Buzz Aldrin during the Apollo 11 mission. This small flag, bearing the image of a double-headed eagle, a symbol of the highest degrees of Freemasonry, was unfurled during that very moment of silence when Aldrin conducted his secret ceremony. Upon returning to Earth, Aldrin confirmed the fact of the ritual, though he did not go into detail. Special medallions, commissioned by Masonic lodges specifically for space missions, also remained on the lunar surface. These medallions, made of super-strong alloys capable of withstanding the extreme temperatures of the lunar surface, contained traditional Masonic symbols, the compass, the square, and the letter G, signifying both geometry and the great architect of the universe. Commemorative plaques left by the Apollo crews also deserve attention. At first glance, they contain only the names of the astronauts and the mission date. But upon closer inspection, one can notice peculiarities in the arrangement of the text and the geometry of the plaques themselves. The distances between the lines and the proportions of the plaques correspond to the golden ratio, a mathematical proportion of special significance in Masonic geometry. Of particular interest is the so-called lunar brotherhood stone, a small piece of lunar soil that was brought to Earth and subsequently distributed among the grand lodges of various countries. This stone, according to Masonic sources, is used in special rituals, symbolizing the spread of Masonic light beyond our planet. Among the personal belongings left by astronauts were also Masonic rings. By tradition, some members of the Brotherhood left their rings on the moon as a symbol of the eternal connection between the earthly and cosmic temples of Freemasonry. These rings, buried in the lunar soil in specific locations, form, according to some interpretations, a geometric pattern visible only from a certain perspective. All these artifacts, taken together, form a peculiar Masonic complex on the lunar surface, a system of symbols understandable only to the initiated. The arrangement of the lunar module landing sites, if connected by lines on a map of the moon, forms a figure resembling the Masonic triple tau, a symbol associated with the Royal Arch, one of the highest degrees of Freemasonry. Conspiracy theories about the connection between Freemasonry and the U.S. space program have existed for decades and continue to find new adherents. One of the most popular claims that the lunar missions were completely faked, and the Masonic Brotherhood played a key role in this grand mystification. According to this version, the high concentration of Masons among astronauts is explained by the need to maintain secrecy. A brotherhood bound by oaths and obligations was an ideal tool for maintaining confidentiality. Proponents of the theory point to strange shadows in lunar photographs, the absence of stars in the sky, and a flag waving in a vacuum as evidence of filming in a pavilion. Masonic symbols in mission patches are interpreted by them as hidden messages to the initiated, a kind of winks to those who know the truth. However, these theories are shattered by relentless logic and scientific facts. Thousands of independent experts have confirmed the authenticity of lunar materials. The absence of stars is explained by the exposure of cameras set for the bright lunar surface. The flag's movement is caused by inertia after installation, not wind. Moreover, the USSR, the main competitor in the space race, which possessed powerful tracking capabilities, never questioned the fact of the American landing on the moon. Another popular theory suggests that Masons used the space program to contact extraterrestrial civilizations. According to this version, the ancient brotherhood holds secret knowledge about the existence of aliens obtained from ancient civilizations of Egypt and Sumer. The moon landing was allegedly not so much a scientific achievement as a ritual act intended to establish contact with extraterrestrial intelligence. Adherents of this theory point to strange radio intercepts during Apollo missions and unexplained objects in some photographs of the lunar surface. They interpret Aldrin's Masonic ceremony as an ancient ritual of invocation, known only to the highest degrees of the Brotherhood. However, this theory also does not stand up to criticism. All strange radio signals received technical explanations, and unexplained objects in photographs turned out to be film defects or optical effects. A more substantiated, though controversial, theory is that Freemasonry served as an informal social elevator within NASA. The high percentage of Masons among astronauts and agency leadership could have been the result not of a mystical conspiracy, but of simple social networking, a phenomenon well known to sociologists. In a closed environment where trust and personal recommendations are crucial, belonging to the Brotherhood gave advantages in career advancement. This does not mean targeted discrimination against non-Masons, but it created a system in which insiders had better chances. Where is the line between fact and fiction? The following facts are documented. Buzz Aldrin was indeed a Mason and performed some ceremony on the moon. A significant percentage of astronauts belonged to Masonic lodges. NASA symbolism contains elements that echo the Masonic tradition. However, there is no evidence of a global conspiracy, falsification of lunar missions, or secret contacts with aliens. Reality, as usual, turns out to be more interesting than conspiratorial fantasies. Freemasonry, with its emphasis on science, progress, and brotherhood, naturally attracted people of a certain type: educated, purposeful, willing to take risks for higher goals. It was precisely such people who became astronauts. Masonic values, the pursuit of the light of knowledge, self-improvement, mutual assistance, perfectly corresponded to the spirit of the space program. There is no need to look for a secret conspiracy where there is a natural coincidence of values and aspirations. Man's venture beyond the confines of his native planet became not only a technological breakthrough but also a spiritual experience, transforming consciousness. The Masonic tradition, with its centuries-old interest in cosmology and the starry sky, offered a unique philosophical framework for comprehending this experience. For astronaut Masons, space flights were not merely the execution of a scientific mission, but also a unique spiritual journey, a pilgrimage to the stars. Masonic cosmology, rooted in ancient esoteric teachings, views the universe as a magnificent temple created by the great architect. The stars and planets in this system are not just physical bodies, but symbols of spiritual truths awaiting discovery. For the initiated Mason, each celestial body holds special significance, reflecting a specific aspect of the spiritual path. The moon, in this tradition, symbolizes the reflected light of divine wisdom, the first step toward enlightenment. It is no wonder that this satellite became humanity's first target in space. Many astronauts returning from space missions spoke of the amazing worldview transformation they experienced. Edgar Mitchell, the sixth man on the Moon and a prominent Mason, described his experience as cosmic consciousness, a feeling of deep interconnectedness with the entire universe, transcending ordinary human experience. After returning to Earth, he dedicated his life to the study of consciousness and paranormal phenomena, founding the Institute of Noetic Sciences. James Irwin, an Apollo 15 astronaut, though not a Mason, experienced a profound religious experience on the Moon that led him to establish a missionary organization. He often said that he felt the presence of God on the lunar surface more strongly than anywhere else on Earth. For Masons, such a transformation of consciousness holds special meaning, echoing the concept of spiritual awakening symbolically represented in their rituals. The Masonic initiation ritual includes the symbolic death and rebirth of the candidate, which metaphorically corresponds to the experience of astronauts who detached from Earth and looked at it with new eyes. Buzz Aldrin, in his memoirs, described the feeling of awe that overwhelmed him at the sight of Earth from space, a small blue marble in the boundless blackness. This experience of humanity's unity and the fragility of our common home has direct parallels with Masonic teachings on the brotherhood of all people under the gaze of the great architect of the universe. It is noteworthy that many astronauts, after returning from space, became more actively involved in Masonic work, seeing in the ancient tradition of brotherhood the keys to understanding their transformative experience. Their testimonies of shared cosmic consciousness enriched philosophical discussions within the lodges, adding a new dimension to traditional Masonic concepts. In the Masonic tradition, there is the concept of journey to the East, a symbolic movement from darkness to light, from ignorance to knowledge. Space flights, especially to the Moon, can be seen as a physical embodiment of this spiritual journey. An astronaut leaving Earth literally rises above everyday life, striving towards celestial light, a concept that deeply resonates with the Masonic worldview. The geographical placement of key NASA facilities has never been accidental. A careful study of the map of United States space centers reveals astonishing patterns that extend beyond simple technical expediency. The Kennedy Space Center at Cape Canaveral, the primary launch site for the American space program, is located on the 28th parallel, a number of particular significance in Masonic numerology. The sum of the digits 2 and 8 yields 10, the number of perfection in esoteric tradition. It is noteworthy that the Great Pyramid of Giza, an ancient structure that Masons consider an embodiment of supreme wisdom, is situated on the same parallel. Such a coincidence can hardly be called accidental. The Mission Control Center in Houston, the heart of operational management for space missions, is located within a triangle formed by 3 large Masonic temples. If one connects them with lines on a map, an almost perfect triangle with angles corresponding to important astronomical directions emerges. On solstices and equinoxes, the sun rises and sets precisely along these lines when viewed from the control center. The architecture of space centers also holds Masonic secrets. The main building of the Kennedy Space Center is designed using the proportions of the Golden Ratio, a mathematical constant with sacred significance in Freemasonry. The height of the Mission Control Center building in Houston is 33 feet, a number corresponding to the highest degree of the Scottish Rite of Freemasonry. The internal layout of many NASA facilities follows the principles of sacred geometry used in the construction of Masonic temples. Particularly indicative is the layout of the launch pads at Cape Canaveral. If connected on a map, they form a figure resembling the compass and square, the main symbols of Freemasonry. The central axis of this figure is oriented towards the constellation Sirius on certain days of the year. a star of particular significance in Masonic cosmology as a symbol of higher knowledge. The choice of location for NASA facilities was often explained by practical considerations: proximity to the ocean for eastward launches, sparsely populated areas for safety, and a favorable climate. However, researchers of the Masonic trace in the space program point to additional factors. Many facilities are located on ancient energy lines, known as ley lines, or in places with special geomagnetic activity. Such places were traditionally considered sacred in various esoteric traditions, including Freemasonry. It is noteworthy that many Masonic temples in the USA are also located along these invisible lines of force. The Marshall Space Flight Center in Huntsville, where rockets for the Apollo program were developed, is situated on land formerly owned by a well-known Mason and industrialist. Before construction began, a special cornerstone laying ceremony was performed there according to Masonic ritual, with the participation of high-ranking members of the Brotherhood. This ritual, although performed publicly, contained elements understandable only to the initiated. The Jet Propulsion Laboratory in Pasadena, which manages NASA's unmanned missions, is located where several ancient Native American trails, considered sacred, converge. The laboratory's founder, Jack Parsons, was known for his fascination with occultism and esoteric practices that parallel Masonic rituals. His influence on the choice of location for the laboratory is documented. Of particular interest is the geographical relationship between key NASA facilities and ancient monuments. If one draws a line from the Kennedy Space Center through the Johnson Space Center in Houston and extends it, it will point to the Nazca Plateau in Peru, a site of mysterious geoglyphs depicting, among other things, astronomical objects. Masons have traditionally shown interest in ancient civilizations and their astronomical knowledge, seeing in them guardians of lost wisdom. With the fall of the Apollo-era curtain, the golden age of overt Masonic presence in the U.S. space program also ended. Today's NASA differs significantly from the agency of the 60s and 70s, both in structure and in the composition of its staff. But does this mean that Masonic influence has completely disappeared from the space industry? The answer to this question is not as simple as it might seem at first glance. Official statistics on membership in Masonic lodges among modern astronauts are not published, unlike the Apollo era, when many openly declared their affiliation with the ancient Brotherhood. However, researchers note that the percentage of Masons among Space Shuttle and International Space Station program astronauts is significantly lower than in the 60s. This can be explained both by the general decline in the popularity of Freemasonry in American society and by a change in the criteria for selecting astronauts. Whereas in the early years of NASA, preference was given to military test pilots, an environment traditionally associated with Freemasonry. The modern astronaut corps is much more diverse in origin, including scientists of various specialties, engineers, and even doctors. Furthermore, the internationalization of the space program has led to the emergence of astronauts from countries where the Masonic tradition is not as strong as in the USA. Nevertheless, some elements of continuity remain. The symbolism of modern space missions still contains elements that can be interpreted through the prism of Masonic tradition. For example, the emblem of mission STS-135, the last flight of the shuttle Atlantis, included a phoenix, a symbol of rebirth, which has deep meaning in Masonic tradition. It is noteworthy that the commander of this mission, Christopher Ferguson, reportedly had ties to Masonic circles. NASA's internal culture also retains elements reminiscent of Masonic traditions. Pre-launch rituals. certain astronaut superstitions, even the mode of communication between crew members and mission control. All of this can be seen as echoes of that special atmosphere of secrecy and exclusivity characteristic of Masonic lodges. However, modern NASA exists in an era of much greater transparency and public scrutiny. The internet and social media have made it impossible to maintain the level of secrecy that was available in the 60s. Today's astronauts blog, post photos on Instagram, and conduct live broadcasts from space, conditions not conducive to conducting secret rituals. It is also difficult to trace an overt Masonic presence in the leadership of modern NASA. While many agency administrators were known Masons during the Apollo era, almost nothing is known about the Masonic affiliation of current leaders. This may indicate either a decline in the Brotherhood's influence or a more thorough concealment of such ties in an era of informational openness. It is interesting to note that in the private space sector, which plays an increasingly significant role in space exploration, Masonic influence is also not explicitly traced. Neither Elon Musk, nor Jeff Bezos, nor Richard Branson, key figures in commercial astronautics, have confirmed ties to Freemasonry. However, some analysts point to the similarity of SpaceX's corporate culture with elements of Masonic tradition, an emphasis on meritocracy, special rituals for initiating new employees, and even certain symbolism in the design of Crew Dragon spacecraft. Perhaps the most significant legacy of Masonic influence in the modern space industry is not formal membership in lodges, but a philosophical approach to space exploration. The idea that space research has not only a practical but also a spiritual dimension, that it is part of humanity's great path to enlightenment. This concept, consonant with the Masonic worldview, is still present in the rhetoric of NASA and private space companies. Freemasonry has long shown interest not only in earthly affairs, but also in the starry sky. However, the connection between secret societies and space programs is not limited to the American experience. Looking at other countries, we discover astonishing parallels and differences that shed light on the universal nature of humanity's striving for the stars. The Soviet space program, NASA's main competitor in the space race, had its own specific connections with esoteric traditions, albeit different from American Freemasonry. Konstantin Tsiolkovsky, the father of Russian cosmonautics, was deeply immersed in cosmic philosophy and theosophical ideas. His concept of radiant humanity, which would overcome earthly limitations and spread throughout the universe, has clear parallels with the Masonic idea of spiritual evolution. Sergei Korolev, the chief designer of the Soviet space program, although not associated with formal secret societies, showed interest in ancient knowledge about space. According to close associates, he studied works on astrology and ancient calendar systems, finding in them a source of inspiration for his technical solutions. It is noteworthy that the first human flight into space took place on April 12th, a day of special significance in several esoteric calendars. The European space program also demonstrates interesting connections with ancient traditions. The name of the European Space Agency, Ariane, refers to ancient Greek mythology, and many missions bear names from classical mythology: Hermes, Gaia, Huygens. This naming tradition resonates with the Masonic practice of appealing to ancient sources of wisdom. The ESA headquarters in Paris is located in an area historically associated with the Rosicrucians, an esoteric brotherhood closely intertwined with the Masonic tradition. The building's architecture contains elements that can be interpreted as references to sacred geometry, so important to Masons. The Chinese space program, the youngest of the major ones, at first glance seems free of esoteric influences. However, closer inspection reveals interesting parallels. The name "5" for Chinese spacecraft translates as "6", a concept deeply rooted in Taoist alchemy, the Chinese equivalent of Western esoteric traditions. The choice of dates for key launches often corresponds to auspicious days, according to the traditional Chinese calendar, and some design elements of spacecraft include symbols associated with ancient Chinese cosmology. The Indian space program perhaps most openly demonstrates a connection with spiritual traditions. Before rocket launches, pujas, Hindu blessing rituals, are regularly held, and many missions bear Sanskrit names related to Vedic astronomy. The logo of the Indian Space Research Organization includes elements that echo ancient yantras, visual tools for meditation, comparable to the geometric symbolism of Freemasonry. The Japanese space program also reveals interesting parallels with esoteric traditions. The name of the agency, JAXA, is written in Japanese characters that, in traditional Japanese cosmology, are associated with the concept of, "7". Many Japanese space missions bear names from Shinto mythology, and the design of some spacecraft includes elements related to the esoteric tradition of Onmyodo, a Japanese system of cosmology and occultism. What unites these diverse traditions? In all cultures, the striving for the stars is invariably intertwined with spiritual quests. Space has never been perceived solely as physical space. It has always also been a metaphor for an inner journey, an expansion of consciousness, a search for higher knowledge. This universal tendency suggests that the connection between space programs and esoteric traditions is not accidental. Perhaps humanity's very striving for the stars has a deep spiritual component, which finds expression in various cultural forms, from Masonic rituals at NASA to Taoist symbols in the Chinese space program. Summarizing our study of the connection between Freemasonry and space programs, we stand on the threshold of a new era of space exploration. Humanity is preparing for a return to the Moon and a further journey to Mars. What role will the ancient Brotherhood of Stonemasons play in these ambitious plans? Will Masonic continuity be preserved in future space missions? The Artemis program, designed to return humans to the Moon by 2025, carries symbolic elements that echo Masonic tradition. The very name, a reference to the Greek goddess of the moon, sister of Apollo, creates a symbolic bridge between past and future lunar missions. In Masonic tradition, the moon symbolizes the passive, feminine principle, complementing the solar, masculine energy. This duality reflects the fundamental Masonic principle of balancing opposites. Among the astronauts preparing for flights under the Artemis program are those who uphold family Masonic traditions, children and grandchildren of Apollo-era Masons. Although their affiliation with the Brotherhood is not as openly publicized as in the 1960s, informal ties persist, creating continuity between generations of space explorers. Future Martian missions open a new chapter in the symbolic exploration of space. The Red Planet, named after the god of war, is associated in Masonic tradition with transformation and overcoming obstacles. The journey to Mars is not just a technological challenge, but also the next step in humanity's spiritual evolution, expanding consciousness beyond earthly experience. The philosophical significance of the Masonic presence in the space program extends far beyond a historical curiosity or conspiracy theory. It reflects a deep connection between scientific inquiry and the spiritual pursuit of the light of knowledge, a connection that has been central to Freemasonry since its inception. When Buzz Aldrin conducted his secret ceremony on the lunar surface, he symbolically united ancient wisdom with the advanced achievements of the human mind. This act can be interpreted as a bridge between the past and the future, between earthly traditions and cosmic horizons. Is Masonic influence on the space program merely a cultural phenomenon, a product of a specific historical era? Or does it hold a deeper meaning for understanding humanity's place in the universe? Perhaps the truth lies somewhere in between. Freemasonry, with its emphasis on the geometry and architecture of the cosmos, offers a symbolic language for comprehending the cosmic experience. When astronauts look at Earth from space, seeing it as a single entity without political borders, they experience something akin to the Masonic ideal of universal brotherhood. In the future, when humanity establishes the first permanent settlements on the Moon and Mars, Masonic principles of harmony, balance, and proportion may find new application in the architecture of these extraterrestrial abodes. Perhaps the first temple on another planet will be built using the same sacred proportions as the ancient cathedrals of Earth. Regardless of whether a formal Masonic presence in space programs is maintained, its spiritual legacy, the pursuit of the light of knowledge, the brotherhood of people sharing a common goal, the search for harmony in chaos, will remain an important part of humanity's journey to the stars. In this sense, the Masonic trace in space is not just a historical fact, but a living tradition that continues to inspire new generations of cosmic explorers.